My good wife, she who must be obeyed, insisted that I bring a tie. I'm looking out here and I've been watching all the last couple of days. Nobody wears a tie. Is anybody here with a tie? Put your hand up. Anyway, I hate wearing ties, so I really love this place. Thanks very much. Well, next time. So that was a good segue from Dedi regarding the inconsistent profile of medical compounds that determines their efficacy in specific applications. And this is something that I've been looking at now in cannabis research for the last 4 or 5 years in collaboration with an LP in Ontario. And we're continuing that work. And we're going to hopefully next year build a cannabis research center at Guelph, if I can get a few more dollars, just not much, just a little bit more to put it all together. But we have about 30 faculty engaged, so it's kind of a no-brainer that Guelph should lead Canada's charge in developing the science and technology developments in this exciting field. So in my case, I come to you from a completely different place. My field of research is space exploration. And I hope I'm going to convince you that this is an excellent fit. I've long been saying that space exploration is probably the single most useful potential economic engine for a country like Canada that we can imagine. And now coupling it with the next most useful economic engine in our economy seems like a logical conclusion. So I'm going to explain to you a little bit about what kind of space exploration technology we've developed. Everybody recognizes this guy. Everybody's seen The Martian, right? It's actually one of the most accurate science fiction stories that have been on the movie screen ever, quite frankly, with one exception. You know, they had all the wind on Mars. Mars has an average atmospheric pressure of 0.6 kilopascals. That's less than 1% of Earth. For all intents and purposes, it's kind of a vacuum. So for the wind to mess my hair, it would have to be a couple of 1,000 kilometers an hour. And what they showed there, not so much. Hollywood artistic license. But the arithmetic they applied to the food, spot on. Food determines how far from Earth we can go and how long we can stay. And developing the biological life support, plants in space, the food production system, is the mission that we took on at Guelph about 25 years ago. And around about 2000, with an injection of about $10 million in infrastructure, we jumped to the front of the class in the world in that niche field, biological life support. And it's plants, provide, you can eat them, and as I said, food drives the equation, but they also give us oxygen, recycle our fresh water, scrub our CO2, make us feel good, and give us medicine. So I'll charge through this, but for the last 25 years, my research program, actually more than that, I've been saying 25 years for quite a while now, so it must be more. This has been sort of the objective, to standardize or make consistent profiles of nutritional compounds in food crops for human life support in space. You have to be able to predict the quality and quantity of food and generate the arithmetic to produce that and have reliable life support. It's critical. You can't, and the other thing is, when you go to space, you can't throw anything away. There's no such thing as garbage. We must learn how to recycle every atom of everything we take with us. And those lessons are what we are transferring in tech transfer to terrestrial agri-food sectors, and also the production technology to standardize. If you just change this to nutritional, to medicinal, you've got the cannabis story, or the phytopharmaceutical story in general. Now there's going to be a quiz. So these top two here, the requirements for life support, mass and energy, that is the currency of space travel. It's not money. The money, you have to appreciate, is spent in the Canadian economy. So that's why I have argued literally for a quarter of a century to an unhearing Canadian government that space exploration, you just bite off as big a piece of that apple as you can possibly chew. And it will serve the Canadian economy for the next 10, 15 generations at least. However, we keep braying at it. And so this long list of stuff, and once again, all you have to do is take nutritional out of here and put medicinal, and this whole list applies to the research venture that we've been deploying in pursuit of the cannabis, standardizing the medicinal profile of compounds in cannabis for the last 5 years at Guelph. So here are the toys that I use in that venture. These are the first chambers back in the early 90s. We call them the Guelph Blue Box chamber. Everything, as soon as you close the door on the seeds or the plants you put in there, everything must go around in a circle. So we're developing technologies to recycle water, air, nitrogen, the nutrient fertilizers and everything, the sensor technologies to achieve that, the disinfection protocols that don't leave toxic residues. Does any of this sound like it should go into a cannabis production facility? So this is the chamber we built for the European Space Agency. It's currently in Barcelona in the pilot plant of their life support program. So University of Guelph is the partner with ESA. We collaborate most extensively with NASA at Kennedy Space Center. We have tech transfer and personnel exchanges over the last, since 1999 was when we signed the research collaboration agreement. And these are phenotype testing chambers. This is the most recent. I'll tell it to you in a little more detail. This is the prototype of the machine that we developed for our LP in Ontario. They have now 5 of these, and the most sophisticated and extensive research venue in the world devoted to cannabis. And it's the only place in the world where you can answer some of these questions that we're asking. This will change, of course, especially after I get my own facility, because I can't still grow cannabis on the campus of the University of Guelph. I don't have a license yet, that's in process, working with cannabis compliance. And I don't have a facility yet, that's in process. The design is in our hands. So, and here's another suite of chambers. There's 9 of them there, if you can count them. And they are all plant growth chambers, cylindrical systems, originally designed to be hypobaric, because one of the first questions we asked was, how low can you take the pressure and have plants function and do all the functions of human life support? Food driving the equation. We needed to know how low we could take the pressure, because ultimately you want to have an inflatable greenhouse on the moon and Mars, in the vacuum of the moon and Mars, to reduce the mass, right? Remember, mass and energy. And here's one of our custom LED lamps. It's got 9 channels, and I can play a tune with the spectral quality of the light. And so I can ramp up each color, swing it to the blue, swing it to the red, and look at, and simultaneously in any of our chambers, and we've got 20 or 30 of them in various sizes and descriptions, in any of these sealed chambers, we can measure simultaneously with this concert of environmental variables, light quality and quantity, CO2, temperature, humidity, nutrients, and water. So those 6.5 environment variables are what we have extremely high fidelity management control over, and at the same time, I can measure how the plant responds very precisely. Minute by minute, I can measure photosynthetic gas exchange, water off and oxygen off and CO2 in. So extremely powerful tools developed in the space program and now being deployed in aid of standardizing medicinal cannabis. So here's we call it the PS1000. It was a collaboration between Conviron in Winnipeg, Intervision Light Systems, which is an LED firm that we collaborate with, and our program where we design these systems. And so it has 8 or 9, I think this one has 8 different spectral quality of lights, all the way from ultraviolet through to far red. And we know more or less what each individual component can do, what the photoreceptors are in the plant that stimulate the secondary metabolism, but we don't know exactly. So this is very early days, and all the chemistry and molecular biology that Deddy was referring to. I mean, that is a huge chore. There's a couple of generations of research there just to tease out all the combinations and permutations of compounds that might affect epileptic seizures or autism or God, you know, it's just a huge chore. And it's not one that I have the technology or the skills to address. I'll leave that to him. What I'm going to do is allow the industry to jump around that. It has to happen. We have to do that chemistry and clinical trials and whatever. But I can take and jump around it by saying, okay, give me a strain, any strain. And then we'll develop a high-fidelity environment control recipe, produce the plant, and then inject it into clinical trials. And the error bars are going to go like this. That's the problem right now with trying to predict the efficacy of a specific strain or compound. It's not the same. It's not the same in a couple of greenhouses on the same site. Same strain, same grower, same environment control strategy, same horticultural management, and yet the plants produce different profiles of medical compounds. So that vulnerability to predicting the efficacy is what I can overcome, and for now, and probably for the next generation or so, that is the promise of high-fidelity controlled environment. That we can just steal all this stuff from the space program. They paid for it all, and we can do it a hell of a lot cheaper now. So just as an example of what you can do in these chambers, here's lettuce, tomato, and pepper. And NCER, net carbon exchange rate, just that's photosynthesis. That's the plant growing. And when you increase the light here up to, this is approximately half of full sunlight, and here are the rates of photosynthesis. So under 400 parts per million, so ambient CO2, the carbon dioxide that's sort of ambient in our atmosphere today, all these plants look, grow pretty much the same. But then if you bump the CO2 up to 1200, look at the productivity, and just take a peek. I isolated this one because it's the best example. But the pepper, at 400 ppm of light, which is about a fifth of full sunlight, the plant is generating one unit of net carbon exchange. And if you just, no more energy, no more light, just give it more CO2, same amount of light, you virtually double the productivity of this plant. Now, this is the kind of horticultural management strategies that has been missing from the mainstream production technology of cannabis for the last 50 years. Because we haven't, it's been illegal, damn it. And now that we have the opportunity to exploit some really sophisticated technology and deploy it in aid of this, okay, we're not the cheapest technology on the planet, but, and I'm quoted unfortunately as saying that I'm shamelessly exploiting the cannabis industry sector because they can afford me right now. And it's going to go like this, and the price tag is going to come down a lot. I mean, just look at LEDs. The price tag has fallen by almost an order of magnitude since I started working with them, and the efficiency has gone up by a factor of 2. So things are changing very quickly. The technology is evolving faster than we can consume it, and pay attention. So here's a little example. Here we developed this high-density modular food production. I never use the word vertical farming, but this is a high-density modular food production system, and literally it was paid for by the government of Kuwait. They have a food security issue like ours in the north. Ours in the north is economic. Us southern taxpayers dump in excess of $100 million a year into air freighting fresh produce from Mexico to Yellowknife, etc. And that's got to stop. We have the technology to do it. We did a full-scale feasibility in the north, and it is technically feasible. We have the technology, clearly, but it's also, surprisingly to me, economically feasible. You can make a buck with certain commodities, high-priced, perishable commodities, strawberries, red peppers, the usual suspects in an air freight system. And this is a system that we developed with water-cooled LEDs and hydroponic system. And just for the heck of it, to have some green stuff in the picture for the final report to where the people genetically, not identical, not clones, but they're very genetically similar. They have exactly the same environment control conditions in terms of light intensity, CO2, temperature, humidity, nutrients, water. The only difference is the color of the light. The red one here has almost double the biomass of each of the other two, and there are some obvious differences in size, shape, and color. And of course, grad students, being grad students, did a blind taste test. And with 100% reliability, they could identify, oh yeah, that's the blue one, that's the red one, that's the white one. So I'm affecting its size, shape, color, taste. Color and taste are secondary metabolites. THC and CBD and all the terpenes and flavonoids in cannabis are secondary metabolites. So we've got a tool here. And so we're going to apply it to this critter. I like my picture better than yours, Denny. I know it's almost exactly the same, but the color here is...
I took the picture.
Okay. So, we're looking at a range of different studies. This is some of the work that we've done. We have some sensors that we develop for applications in the space program to measure plant water stress directly with radio telemetry. So we can follow the course, and we've deployed it in the nursery sector for irrigation management, in the greenhouse sector for the same. And here we used it in cannabis for irrigation management, looking at the effects of different irrigation management strategies and trying to put a lie to the conventional horticultural management practices that seem to be throughout the industry in variations, and showed quite conclusively that don't do it that way, do it this way, and here's why. And another approach we're taking is we learned in space exploration applications of high-density food production. In space, you want to take the best advantage you possibly can of every cubic centimeter. You want to grow food, as much food in every cubic centimeter. So you have really high-density plant production. The challenge when you do that, and cannabis growers and vertical farmers in urban agriculture applications always try and jam as much biomass into every cubic centimeter as they can for the money, right? And we're doing the same thing for life support. And so we had to solve the biggest problem, homogenizing the aerial environment, temperature, humidity, CO2. And now we're working on light. So if you can homogenize, imagine if every leaf can see the same temperature, humidity, CO2, and light, you win, seriously. It's almost impossible to do, but we have achieved almost that objective in with this work, and putting lights inside the canopy is how this is all going to happen. And we've developed and that analysis. Now don't read all this, just look at these numbers. These numbers reflect the increase in the expression of these various secondary metabolites depending on the deployment of the light. So there's, once again, we're just scratching the surface. There's a heck of a lot that we have to do. And this is just the beginning of developing technologies to successfully homogenize all of that light. And here's the most recent expression. Here's a food production system. We're going to use exactly the same scalable technology in cannabis, but this is called the gravity flow system with our partner Intravision, and this is a company called We the Roots in Toronto. This is set up in a factory, an old factory in downtown Toronto, and they're growing lettuce and herbs and greens for the local high-end restaurant industry. This was, I think I stole this picture from the Globe and Mail. There's another one here. So this is a high-density production system. Each level has the capability to control temperature, humidity, CO2, and light in all of its complexity differently on each level, so you can have different plants, etc. And we're going to do the same thing with cannabis. This is under construction at the moment in Ontario. A monster facility, scares the hell out of me, but we're going to get there. So finally, and I'm getting the wrap sign from the back there, so hurry up. And it's this bottom line here. breeders and producers have to put their heads together and figure out the horticultural management strategies that will produce this standardized. The strain doesn't matter when you mess up the horticultural management. So, because the same strain can produce all kinds of different profiles of medical compounds. And the key then is to marry these two strategies, the breeding and the production, and obviously the curing and drying, that can screw it up as well. So, but I insist that I win. Controlled environment rules in terms of the profile of medical compounds ultimately. Here's what we've done lately. The first 3 graduate students in North America with cannabis in their thesis title. And of course they got by the industry the instant they stepped off the podium and their thesis defense. And this is a little bit out of date, I think. Yeah. There's 5 papers now. This one has been accepted. There's 5 papers now, so I'll update this. So if anybody needs the access to the documentation, I can pass that on. And thank you. That's all I
have. All right. We'll say maybe 3 questions. Try to keep them brief. Just on a tight schedule, please.
I was having a hard time containing my excitement. I'm a genomics guy. So I'm from Thermo Fisher Scientific, Federico Vega, familiar with all the tools that you were using. But I have a couple of questions. So in my tenure at Thermo Fisher Scientific, we had sequenced the human genome, which led to the discovery of specific cancer biomarkers that are now actually being useful to use as therapeutical targets for drugs that may be useful in things like non-small cell lung cancer. And I've seen cases from 20 years ago where that patient would not survive and now they are surviving. Your initiative in precision medicine is extremely exciting. I'm just wondering if you could make a comment on the fact that we haven't been able to explore these compounds because they've been illegal, and how you think that this will accelerate cancer therapy, cancer genomics. Sorry for the complicated.
So my answer divided into, the plant was illegal, our body is illegal. So the endocannabinoid system is legal for many, many years. And from the 90s, it's been discovered, it's been researched a lot. There are thousands of papers around it. The problem is that it's too much to read, so I'm not familiar with all of them. But there is a lot of knowledge. The ability to connect between the cannabis and the endocannabinoid system, this is a key. And I'm dividing or spending a lot of money, time, and efforts in order to create the tools to analyze the endocannabinoid system and how the cannabis is affecting them. And I think when you will have it, it will be a predictor for what is working or not. So if I showed you one cell for the colon that wasn't affected by 650 different types of cannabis, the only things that I learned about this cell that none of the endocannabinoid receptors are expressing on these cells. And that gave me the idea, or the thought that the composition of the receptor that expressing, it's extremely important how it will affect them. And we're investing time and efforts to do that. I think in few years there will be indication like Crohn, colitis, psoriasis, cancer, that we will take a biopsy, we will be able to measure and to analyze the endocannabinoids and then to fit the cannabis to them. There are few diseases like endocannabinoid deficiency. When a patient coming to a physician and you have cluster headaches or migraine, Crohn, and diarrhea, it's 100% endocannabinoid deficiency. Because or you have a mutation in one of the receptors, CD1 receptor, doesn't matter, or a mutation by creating one of the endocannabinoids. If it's mutation on the receptor, so we can't read the message, it doesn't matter how much cannabis you will take. It doesn't help. But if the mutation, the problem is creating the message, then cannabis solves the three effects, and then cannabis is a cure to this endocannabinoid deficiency. We don't have the tool to analyze it yet. We will have quite soon. Not we, not I, we as a world.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm probably, first of all, good morning. I was quite enlightened by what you have to say. I'm sort of out of my field because I'm really an attorney. So I don't know, I'm not supposed to know much about plants. But I was born in Montreal, and born from a father who went to Guelph University, and also some things happened afterwards. And I'm here as a result of him coming to Guelph. But I had been poisoned while going about what I thought was my business, saying some things in the country based on the corruption and the manner in which we're being governed, and I had been poisoned. So I sought refuge with all sorts of remedies because nobody knew exactly what was given to me and what I needed to do to cure myself. So I was introduced to a herbalist in St. Lucia who was a doctor and abandoned most of the traditional medical things and then relied on the knowledge of his grandparents with herbs. And he gave me a series of cannabis plants which he dug up from his mountain place where he lives, including some of the soil, the roots, and all parts of the plant, blended it, and got me to drink it. And the problem in the Caribbean is that we don't have any technology. If you get stopped by the police, they cannot test how much you've been drinking. We don't use this word impairment. It's pointless using a word like that. But what's interesting in the Caribbean is that we have always used edibles. When I was a little kid, they used to give us cake with cannabis in it. I didn't know. But when we were sick, they used to give us a lot of edible things that we thought were treats, but they were actually laced with cannabis to get us better. And when I took the cannabis solutions that my colleague created for me, I began to feel that I was getting a hold of myself in terms of the degenerative effects of what I was poisoned with. But because we don't have technology, we use traditional things. You mentioned something and I started smiling. The farmers in the Caribbean, some of them in some of the countries, who all have different strains, try to trick the plant that is being killed. In some places, it's very crude, as driving a nail with galvanized oil into the plant core.
There is a question there? There is a question there?
Yes, I'm
trying to follow up.
Yes,
My English is not
yes,
so good, so
One of the things is that you mentioned the touching of the plant and the interference of the plant causes the plant to produce different properties. So I'm saying to you, in the Caribbean, we do it crudely. There is a technique used by some of the growers, and they drive a nail through the plant. It produces more resin. Those are the plants that are used mostly for medical interventions in those things. And I would invite somebody like yourself with your techniques and your technology to visit those places. We have no idea what plant we have. We know it's very strong, but we have no way of testing any of it. We have never done that. So do you think that maybe it would be far more specific for us to get a particular solution if we could use the more scientific techniques you've been doing so far?
It's what you're talking about is an environmental element. Driving a nail into the plant is an element of its environmental context. We can improve on the sun. So light, CO2, temperature, humidity, nutrients, and water. Those are the 6 main environment variables. Driving a nail into the stem or shaking the plant or doing these are inconsistent and highly variable effects in the environmental context. So not particularly desirable as an horticultural management strategy. So, and I'm quite serious, I'm not being sacrilegious when I say we can improve what nature does. There's been a lot of work going to the hills of the Andes and trying to replicate those conditions. There's nothing magical about that. And it's not consistent either. So we can actually produce an absolutely solid, predictable, standardized, consistent profile of medical compounds, whatever they are. And then I leave it to Dedi and his crowd to tell me what is the clinical trial efficacy of that and what's the chemistry that created it in between. That'd take a lot longer. I don't have time for that. I'm in a hurry.
Okay, we're gonna have to wrap it up. We're running a little bit late. Sorry about that. Thank you very much. Dr. Murray, Dr. Mike Dixon. Thank you for your time.